It's about to go down with Marc and Cathey, a live coaching show about dropping ideas. Marc and Cathey coach and have conversations with brilliant idea creators who are reimagining the world through the expression of their words, thoughts, and action.
Hey, everybody, I am Cathey Armillas.
And I am Marc Williams, and we want to welcome you to another episode of It's About to Go Down. And we've had international flavor before, but we are bringing you international flavor on 3 different time zones, across seas and overseas. We have a special guest with us today. I met this gentleman many years ago. We took a trip to Malaysia. Cathey was there in Malaysia. And then from there, everything has taken off for a gentleman who is not only a best-selling author, who is not only a keynote speaker, who is a mental health advocate, but I have to say that so differently. He is the Muhammad Ali of mental health. I love that. I love that. Mr. Jeff Davis, who is going to be speaking today in this idea conversation about the power of being open and how the things that we are afraid to share are the things that will make the biggest difference. Jeff, my good friend Jeff, thank you for joining us. We can't wait to hear. Tell us more about the idea around the power of being open, why you're talking about it, and why we all need to hear about it.
Wait, Jeff, before you go, we have to clarify also, gave a TED Talk. Come on now. Come on. Come on.
Yes.
Yes.
In New York City. In New York
City. Okay, proceed, Jeff.
Marc and Cathey, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this. So this idea, the power of being open, the importance of being open, and that the things that we are most afraid to share are going to most help others. First off, let me just go right into it. Based on my experiences, I found that when I take those risks to be vulnerable, that's when I would get through to people's hearts. And that could be in writing, that could be in a book, that could be in a video. But I've experienced this so many times. And yes, there's going to be a few people who it may not resonate, but if we have the courage to be vulnerable, we will change lives. And that is what we're going to talk about today.
Oh my God, I love this. Jeff, I love this so much because I think there's always this fear factor in the world of keeping things close to you that might feel like you shouldn't be in this space for whatever reason. And then I share about it, it makes me more weak. And I have always found, and recently even have found that sharing something that's really hard that I've been going through, I'm amazed at how many people have a deep connection with that thing, and then how it creates so much more healing. I love this. Tell me a little bit how you got into this space. I'd love to hear a little bit of the background.
Yeah, so let's go right to the core of it. So right now I'm 33. Let's go all the way back to when I was 17 years old. So this was 16 years ago. I had a very, very challenging experience. And this was in high school. Now, you often hear of people in high school having the best time ever and, oh, it was the best years of my life. And for me, it is what it is. It was not that at all. I not only had a number of unexpected setbacks in sports, experiencing severe bullying, had a very dysfunctional high school that I went to. I was also experiencing abuse on top of all that. So there were different layers here. There were different levels. And I'll just say it outright. In the spring of my senior year, I nearly took my own life. I nearly ended it all after a year of clinical depression. And this was teenage years, 17 years old. And I shared that right off the bat. I took the risk to be vulnerable, to own my message, to be myself, because I know what it's like to be in those deepest, darkest trenches. And just before I was about to go through with this tragic act, I called the person who I thought was my best friend. And the person said, Jeff, I have to tell you, no one cares.
Oh God.
No one cares. Form of tough love. So I've since shared this with another friend of mine, and I thought it was a brilliant insight. Another dear friend of mine said, Jeff, it was a form of tough love. And look, I know he was 17, not expecting him to have all this empathy, but it was a very messed up thing to say. I had the clinical depression. I had the unexpected setbacks in sports, and I had all these other things happening. And I say all of this because you said, how did I get into this? Well, I know what it's like to go through the dark night of your soul and then to feel like absolutely no one cares. And this has lit a fire in me so big, I cannot even describe it in words. And I have built my life on helping others, on caring. And I've even gotten notes, I've even gotten messages, Jeff, I was about to take my life and your story prevented me from doing it. One more quick thing I'll say is that, yes, I've been through setbacks that were worse physically, that were worse financially, but mentally, that one was the worst as a teenager. And I share that right off the bat because that's really the core. That's the core, and my core mission for being here on planet Earth is to prevent suicides and to help people with their mental health. So that's how I got in it, going through a very, very difficult high school experience.
I
Jeff,
applaud you, my friend.
I'm
I
sorry
applaud
that
you.
went through that, but very grateful that you took and made something great out of it and that you can inspire other people with. So Marc, I'd love to start. I love that we're having this conversation with Jeff, because many times when we're talking to people, Jeff, our conversations are like, oh, I want to give a TED talk, or I have this idea and I work on it and I talk about it all the time. Sometimes even people speak about it, but it's kind of like furthering that idea. And so you're definitely in that advanced space, right? You've already been talking about this. You do this all the time. You're on podcasts a lot. You're speaking on it. You've given a TED talk. Tell us how we could help you with this idea. Like, let's poke holes, not poke holes. That's not that's not a good term for it. Let's make it deeper. How about that's a more positive term, right? Like, let's make this deeper. Let's get into it. Like, let's get into a geeky idea conversation so we can help you spread that message further, wider, deeper, more powerful, more impactful. So how can we do that? Let's start there.
Yes, well, it's a total honor to be here. And Marc and Cathey, I know you're both doing great work. So I'll say this, and it's an idea. Why not another one? Why not another TEDx? I know there are a lot of opportunities. So I'd say, how can we flesh out this idea? Let's dive into the core of it. Let's look at the pros and the cons, the challenges and the great things. And let's see how we can find that sweet spot to best help others as we talk about this.
Ooh, I like that.
I love that a lot.
Yes.
So Marc, his first TED talk was, if I got this right, is how to fulfill your inner life. Is that right, Jeff?
Yes.
So, Marc, what do you think, what is standing out to you that's more powerful? That's kind of like, I love this idea. Like, this doesn't sound like you kind of spoke, you might've shared the story in your TED talk, Jeff, but not this kind of idea of like, the thing that you feel like might make you the weakest will make you the most powerful. Am I right?
Yes. You actually hit the nail on the head. Very beautiful.
All right, episode done.
I see you're very well, very well. I mentioned it briefly, and it actually intrigued some people. They're like, oh, there were like a few lines in there where and people are like, oh, there's more there. And of course, you have the 18 minutes of the TEDx. But yeah, that's right. There's another 18 minutes that's waiting there for me to share this idea to help even more people.
I love it. I love it.
You know, Cathey, it reminds me of this, and you have said this to me in the past. Jeff just shared an inkling of the story in the last TED Talk, right? And people are often wondering about that personal story, right? It's sometimes I don't want to hear all that other stuff. Just tell me your story. That's how we draw them in. Jeff, I'm curious, other than the 18-minute time limit that might have gotten in the way of sharing the whole story, is there any other reason that made you not share the whole story?
I would say, as I was preparing for that TEDx and as I gathered my best insights and ideas and stories, I'd say that it was a delicate balance where I wanted to make sure that I was being vulnerable and sharing, but also people that I may have been referring to, I also didn't want to necessarily expose someone who didn't need to be. Now, I'm not afraid to say anything, and I will say that in keynotes, I will go there. But there was one factor where I thought, like, okay, there are certain elements, there are a few people that I'll mention vaguely, but I didn't really want to go into the depths for that reason. And then the other thing, and you can also share your thoughts here. I'm very interested. I didn't want to make it like too much about me. I had these stories, and I know this is always a big sort of topic in the personal development space. It's kind of all about you, and it's kind of not. And I didn't want to just get up there and have it only be my story. So in my TEDx in New York City, I shared a couple other stories. I shared the tragic story of Robin Williams. I also mentioned the story of a very successful Toastmaster. So I wanted to pivot out from myself for that reason. And I'm not saying it was good or bad. It was a decision. It was well received, but of course I'm open to fleshing it out further for the next iteration.
Marc, I love that you asked him that. And I love what you just said, Jeff, because, you both know that I coach a lot of TED speakers. I've been coaching so many TED speakers. And so I understand, I can understand and appreciate that balance. And I think a lot of people, do this thing where they're like, oh, the story is the reason why you give the talk, but it's not the whole talk. And that's where sometimes people get it wrong. And so I could see you, for instance, opening with your story, and maybe you open, like in my mind, I could see you standing on the TED stage again and saying, I'm getting ready to end my life, and I've got one last lifeline call. I call my best friend, and like you have this conversation, and you could change best friend if you don't want to out somebody. It's only the emotional truth that we need, right? Although, saying best friend, unless a whole bunch of people know who your best friend is, or who your best friend was, I should say, it's not going to out anybody. But I could see you starting in that space and then saying kind of making it come full circle and basically saying, I didn't do it, thank God. But actually, like, the thing that I really want to talk about today is the thing that I was brave enough, and I didn't even realize it. I was brave enough at 17 to actually talk about something that most people would have kept inside. Most people don't make that last call before they do something that tragic. Most people don't. And so even that kind of act that you did, even though you got a really horrible response, was kind of a brave act. And I think that's a great, that would be the reason why you would be standing on that stage, was for that story. But then everything else that you say would be for the audience. And so let's talk about that, because then everything that you say from that point on is like, what it made me learn is this idea that I've now been practicing, which is, the things that are the hardest and deepest and cut us the most are the things, and the things that we want to hide the most are the things that we need to open the light and be vulnerable and share and connect. And, and then that whole talk becomes for the audience.
Cathey, I have goosebumps right now. I
Ooh,
have goosebumps.
me too.
I love it. I was just completely in the moment listening, and I'm like, wow, yes. Cathey and Marc, you guys are good. You guys are good. Oh, I love how you said, Cathey, and I may be paraphrasing a bit, but you said if we don't want to out someone, we can touch on the emotional truth. Oh, that was beautiful, very helpful. I want to thank you for sharing that, because that's something where I'm always like, well, I'm never going to share something to hurt someone or out of anger. There may be frustration in that story, but I'm always sharing to help and out of love. And that's where there's always that delicate balance. So thank you for that clarification, because that's very important.
Let's talk about that for a minute, Marc, because I know you and I both use this. I know we both use this as a storytelling technique. I have a story with my sister. I'll tell it really quick. I have a story with my sister. My sister and I, when we were growing up, we were not friends at all. My sister was kind of the family snitch, and, she told on everybody. And so all of us, we didn't like her, but I realized as an adult, like, she had a hard life. She got bullied a lot for her weight. She was picked on. She didn't have any friends. And I didn't realize, because I was older than her. I was years older than her. When I was in high school, she was, she's much younger than me. And so we kind of had that disconnect with age. But we had this one moment where we went to the grocery store with our parents, and it was kind of a foreshadowing of what would come in our lives, because now we're best friends, where we shared a fun moment where a song came on and we started singing and dancing and like messing around. I don't remember what song that is, but it doesn't matter. And so when I tell the story, I change the song sometimes, because it doesn't matter if it's Madonna's Like a Virgin, or if it was Michael Jackson's Bad, or, if it's Ice Cube or whoever, it doesn't matter. Like, the thing that the emotional truth, and I could change. And so when something's sensitive, you can also change the character. You could say, I called a cousin, or I called a school counselor. You need to be careful with your story, because your story changes a lot with who that person is. If you say I called a school counselor and the counselor was like, you should just end it all, or you're not like, nobody cares or something like that, like that's putting a different meaning on it. I don't know, Mark, what do you think about that?
I think that what you said resonates so much because so I can be a very private person as much as we are speakers and telling our own stories. And yet, as the two of you know, I send out these Tuesday morning tune-ups, right? And sometimes over the course of these last several years, sometimes they have been very personal stories. And yet, even if it was a story about me and my daughter, all of a sudden it became a story about an uncle and a nephew.
Yeah, right.
Or a teacher and a student, right? And so I've completely changed the characters because at the end of the day, it's the story, or I love this, the emotional truth that is most important. So I think that's a really good point. And the other thing that I have found to be very useful when sharing these things where you want to find that balance is, and Cathey, you have talked about this a lot too, is take the focus off of you and for a moment have the audience imagine it was them.
Yeah.
Right? The power of the you. Imagine that you are in this situation and you have one friend you wanted to call and your friend says to you, and now all of a sudden you put the audience in that situation and now they're experiencing this situation, they're experiencing this emotional truth on a personal level.
Yeah, from their perspective, from their point of view. Oh, Mark, I love that. I love that because Jeff, you may already know this because I'm pretty sure a lot of your work overlaps with a lot of psychology and whatnot. But the psychology of you, meaning me, like the audience, when you're a speaker and you actually use their name or them as a grouping, or our brains can't help but to answer whatever's being said to us. If a speaker asks you a question, like if the speaker's like, hey, how many of you have been here? You know, this thing that people do all the time. I mean, no matter what is asked to the audience answers it, even if it's like arguing with the speaker. No, I've never done that before. You're saying in your head or whatever, you know, your brain still does that. It's kind of like, oh, don't look over there. There's an accident. The first thing we do is look over there, right? So that's really powerful, Mark. I really like that.
Yeah. And my add, sometimes I like the subtle shift from I to you. Yeah. So for example, I had a former student ask me to speak to a group of students for the Special Olympics. And he told me a story about the time when he was on his basketball team and the coach had them do these, I'm going to use the term, although it's not used in the same reference as what you're talking about. In basketball, they call them suicide drills, right? Running back and forth.
Yeah.
So when I speak to the audience about it, I said, my former student told me about the time when his coach had them do these suicide drills. You'd run back and forth and back hundreds of times. And you would get so tired doing this that when you fell to the floor, you would feel exhausted. And so I start off by telling people that this is his story.
I love that.
With a subtle shift of the
word,
you, it all of a sudden became their story. And so I say that to you because that's a way of still owning your experience, which is your why for sharing everything, and then a subtle shift into how would it make you feel?
Yes.
I love that, Mark. Oh, huge. Like that. I love that because you just you opened up a new possibility when we're telling a story, Jeff, that we don't have to, doesn't have to be like, well, this happened and then this and me and me and me and I did this and I did this. I love it. Mid story, you could just change it and say the word you, and then it gives it a totally different meaning. I love that.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah.
I love that. Because I could actually see him I could see him on the stage opening with this story and he'd have to start off with his stuff, right? He'd have to say, I went through this abuse, this happened, I got bullied. And then, I went to make this phone call. And then all he has to do is when the phone call is starting or something, what would you do if the person on the other line, and just mid story, like what would you do if the person on the other line said this, and then paused Nobody cares.
Powerful. Yeah, that's.
And then just
I
stop,
mean,
like leave
yeah.
that hang, let that hang.
Yeah. And the word hang is so important here because like that's what you do for the audience. Like that when you said that your best friend at the time said that, like the whole story dropped for me in a whole nother way. But with all that said, this is the technical part of how maybe to tell that story and to keep that balance. As we delve into the story of your why, I'm curious about two components of this story and how it ties in with this message of being open. You said you were going through clinical depression. You were in a very bad place. What made you strong enough to reach out to that best friend? Because I can think back to being in high school, even with a best friend, it's not so easy to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I'm
love
curious about
that
your
question,
answer to
Marc.
that question, because I think that could be very helpful for people in the audience.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, amazing question. Let me say this. One of my best friends today, just to make sure we have the context right. So now pivoting back to the present day, she's a psychologist, and she said to me, Jeff, statistically speaking, you shouldn't be alive. And I've researched this and I've spoken to many psychologists. If you lack social support, it's very unlikely you'll make it. And I'm going to share with you, and I can feel the energy flow right now. So I have the rope in my hands, and a spark of hope came to me from a higher power. I don't know why, but I truly believe it was God. A higher power came to me and it said, put down the rope and go back to your room. Now, this is another thing to discuss because a lot of people believe in God, some don't. So then the thing I would wonder is, how can I want to maintain the integrity of the story, but reach the most people possible. So that was really it. It was some inner spark. And I share it now. People are like, a lot of people, very sadly and unfortunately, due to circumstances that are completely unthinkable, oftentimes do not get that. And they go through with the tragic act. And I say that with the utmost empathy, simply that they had lost their battle with the mental illness. So this higher power came to me. It told me to put down the rope. And then because this higher power said, Jeff, go back to your room. And I said, no, I'm worthless. I want to end my pain. And the higher power said, Jeff, someday you're going to talk about this and help others with the story. And I'm like, no, and I'm wondering, am I going insane? I mean, I'm thinking, like, am I going insane? It's like this knowing, like it wasn't a literal voice like we're talking now, but it was like an inner knowing. And then I put down the rope, and then I call my friend. And even though he said those brutally unkind words, I still had this power from the thing, and from the higher power. And then I went into a meditation, a very, very deep meditation, and I went into an energy field. I didn't leave my body. And the reason I'm laughing, by the way, is because it's absurd. I don't know how this happened. I told you I share this with people and they say, Jeff, I've never heard of something like this before. I'm in deep meditation, and I'm actually smiling, by the way, out of joy to be alive. So I have the utmost respect for everyone struggling. I simply wanted to say I'm grateful to be alive today. And I had put down the rope. I had the higher power. My best friend was completely disrespectful. I go into a deep, deep meditation, and in there I go into this energy field. Wasn't an outer body experience, but it was in an energy field. And in that energy field, I realized your self-worth doesn't depend on external circumstances.
I love that.
I do too.
I have an idea, Jeff, for that, your conundrum of like, people like you experience this experience in the higher power from God.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that really always trips people up in any form of space where people talk about something spiritual or God or religion, is that they always feel like the speaker might be trying to put something on them. So why don't you ask them the question? I think it would be good to say, like, have you ever had, like, you can stop in the middle of your story and say, have you ever had a moment where you just can't explain where the answer is coming from? That's what I felt. I'm just trying to explain that to you. And so then it becomes like, oh yeah, either I have had that, because I've had those moments, Jeff. I had a moment not too long ago where a song came on that wasn't in my playlist that made me cry my eyeballs out. And I was like, where did this song come from? And then when I started listening to the words, I was like, oh, I know where it came from. And I know why it was put on. And it was the weirdest thing. And so I'm sure other people have experienced things that if you just ask the question, have you ever had some kind of moment happen that you just can't explain? And then it gives responsibility to the audience to make their own decisions, and you have your own. And so you're kind of being respectful for what other people believe or have experienced, but you're sharing your own.
Yes,
That's
love that
genius.
switch to the you. That love that switch to the you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, this whole talk, I think I'm glad we're talking about this, you guys, because I think this whole talk is your entire talk will become more powerful the more you can keep switching to them. People don't need somebody, not saying that you do this, Jeff. It just happens a lot in the speaking world. People don't need somebody standing there going, I have all this information that you don't have, and I'm going to tell it to you. People want to sit in a room and be connected to other human beings and have that a human experience and share it via stories and emotions and connections. And so you're just basically the facilitator of that. You're the facilitator of that because you have a strong story, and then you have a solution that you can share, but you can have every room that you ever step in, you can have everybody share it with each other, and you can make it so powerful. And if I were you, that would always be my goal. I'd be like, no matter what I'm doing now today, like, how can I step into a room and make that way more of a human experience for everybody else?
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Can we pause for just for a second on that? And I don't mean to detour from this conversation, but you just said something. I just want to put us in the space right now as three speakers. And what does it mean for us to create an experience for people in the audience? Because that's powerful. We get up on stage and we speak. We get up and get up in the room and speak from the front of the room, and there's people sitting in the crowd. But the word experience, I'm just curious. Cathey already spoke about it, Jeff. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that, creating an experience for an audience?
Creating an experience, at the wonderful word. We're talking about Muhammad Ali type of experience. It's using your superpower. Now, your superpower, the speaker, the facilitator, could be going deep. It could be empathy and compassion. It could be some kind of story that connects the dots for the audience member. But we talked about that human experience. And I find if you can tap into your superpower, which is your most powerful ability to connect with that audience member, that will leave them with something that will transform them. Yes, it will inspire, and then it will go beyond inspiring. Well, it will transform them because of how deep you went. So touching their hearts and souls and going deep enough to allow them to relate at such a fundamental level that they can start to shift their very paradigm.
Well, and Mark, I'm glad you pulled this up, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. It wasn't a detour at all. I think it's exactly in line with everything we're saying. I think there's a difference between the TED Talk and the keynotes, right? Or whatever, any other trainings you do, because I envisioned you standing on the stage opening with this powerful story, and then how Mark tweaked it a little bit so that it kind of went back to the audience. I love that. I can picture that for the TED Talk. And I can also picture it for any talks that you give anywhere. But when I think of an experience where you might be in a room with somebody, I could see you just get on the ground and just sit on the floor, and then, give kind of get us in that mode so we can visually kind of see where you might have been at and how you might have been thinking just by sitting. And then maybe one of the exercises you can do is you can like put a big warning before it. And again, I'm talking keynote now or training or something. You could put a big warning, but you have people pair up and ask them to share the one thing that they feel most comfortable sharing with this person. And it depends. Like if you're doing it in a space where it's a bunch of strangers, people will probably be way more comfortable than if it's a group of people that work with each other. Share the thing that you feel most comfortable sharing that's been a really hard thing in your life. Woo! You will, that room will light up with so much power and so much connection. I mean, I can't imagine just being face to face with you, Jeff, or you, Mark, in that room and just hearing anything that anybody has to say. When I was 3, my parents died in a car accident, or like whatever, like so anything that I would hear from the other person would be so powerful. And then anything you teach from that point on, Jeff, because then you can teach it and then it's specifically about the thing that they shared. Then you can keep referring back to that. Like, how did that thing make you feel? How did you get over that thing? Did you realize? And then to your lesson, right, that you said your self-worth isn't dependent on how that situation made you feel. And it's very specific and then it feels very customized. So that's one idea. I don't know, Mark, if you have any other ideas, but I thought about that and I was like, oh, I really want Jeff to be out there, like really getting deep with this message. It's needed so much right now.
Something does come to mind that I'll bring up only as a reference point, because I think there's an opportunity here for Jeff to take your idea about an exercise to the next level. I was in a workshop where they did something called journey mapping. And Jeff, I don't know how familiar you are with this journey mapping, but basically we were asked to pick moments in our lives and do a little drawing associated with each moment. And, you know, we got maybe 10 minutes to do this. And afterwards, we were given an opportunity to share at least a moment or to share the journey. But along that journey, and you were given the opportunity to share something personal or not to share something personal. And I thought that was an interesting way to do that. But clearly, journey mapping is something that's already out there. I'm wondering, as bringing that up as a reference, does any other type of idea, in addition, because we could sit down and we could talk about it, and that's one way. Is there some other way to trigger those thoughts that people can share?
Well, Mark, sorry, Jeff, I want to ask you this because you're the one that would be delivering it, right? I like the journey mapping. I've done journey mapping before. I don't think it quite matches with what he's trying to do, which is like trying to not make somebody, sorry, that's not the right word. trying to get people to share their darkest thing that they normally want to hide. Yeah. So I don't know if we have to overthink it. I mean, if I have to partner up with one person and share my worst thing, I don't get the chance to hide in the journey map. I feel like I could hide in my journey map. I could be like, oh, we moved to California when I was 7 years old or 6 years old. That's true. I feel like I could hide. Whereas if Jeff clearly had me like face off with somebody and have to stand there and just tell the worst thing that I'm willing to share or the thing that I really want to hide. Ooh, I just feel like I'll get to it quick. And I mean, maybe I just feel like that's what we're trying to get at, Jeff. I don't know. What do you think?
One thing that comes to mind as I'm absorbing all of this, as we talk about it, as the creative juices are going, I'm actually going to put it back to you, and we can all discuss it. I'm wondering, what do you do with someone who isn't really about being an open book, who doesn't really like being open? How would you handle that?
Yeah, I love that question. I was actually thinking about it earlier with this whole thing as well.
Mark, what do you think, Mark? 'Cause I have a thought. What do you think?
I'm actually curious to hear what your thought is, because I think that's as somebody who's been a teacher, that's a very tough question.
So I have a couple thoughts, because part of my storytelling training, sometimes asking people to share a story, and I'll ask a very specific question. I've kind of dealt with this before. And I always do preface it with, share whatever you feel comfortable with. There's kind of this is a good thing, right? There's kind of a peer pressure that comes along with that. You ask somebody to do the exercise. I think you're not really going to find a case where I think worst case scenario is there's a partner there's two partners here, right? And then one of them is like, oh, I used to fall down a lot when I was a kid, and I used to, the other person's, that person's clearly not sharing anything, and the other person's like,
Yeah.
I had somebody that I met in Canada who was from Italy tell me the first time I met him that his brother died in a car accident when he was young, and he, like, the journey that he took, not wanting to believe it, and his brother was his best friend, and how tragic it was for him. Like, I can't imagine that in that space when he shared that with me, I opened up like no other, and so I just feel like there's a little bit there, but I mean, maybe that makes it makes you go, maybe the explanation is super critical. Share whatever you feel comfortable with, and also be kind and understanding and empathetic for somebody who might not want to share. And so it's just like really like doubling down on the fact that, hey, we're not doing this to make anybody in this room. I think the bigger question is if somebody started crying, like somebody like really lost it mentally, like was really having a hard time, that would be something I think worse than somebody shutting it down. Like, how would you handle, how would you handle a situation? That's what I would, and that one I would really have to think about, because what if somebody got triggered really bad?
That reminds me of many years ago, I was teaching an English class, and we were studying a short story in which the character's grandmother had passed away. And I would say about 5 minutes into the conversation, one of the students in my class asked to be excused so she can go to the bathroom. And as she got up and took the hallroom pass, she was clearly in tears. And she walked out, and a student of mine said, "Mr. Williams, her grandmother just passed away." And I didn't know. And and when she came back, I want to tell you, I would love to tell you a story about how she came back in the room and I was so brilliant to say this or whatever. I sorry to say that I don't really remember exactly what happened when she came back into the room. But what I do know is that my heightened sensitivity was there. And that we got to the main point, right? Why was I even teaching this story? It wasn't about the grandmother passing away. It was some other thing, that we were teaching, being all English teacher here. And I think that one, if somebody doesn't want to talk about something, or if somebody gets very emotional and starts crying, I always say the first step is we have to acknowledge that space, right? And be completely sensitive to it. And I think something else you said, Cathey, resonates with me as well. Allow people to talk about whatever they want to talk about, right? When we say that I'm going to share something that I haven't shared with anybody else, maybe me sharing the fact that I hate the song The Little Drummer Boy doesn't seem like I'm really opening up, but maybe for me, it is opening up. And so I guess we also have to acknowledge that being open is different for each person.
Yes.
That's true, Mark. I love that. And so I think, Jeff, for you, in order to make this, and I still think this kind of exercise is super powerful, but your wording has to be you have to be very cautious, and I think intentional when you word it. And I think, another thing that you could maybe add to your preface of it is like, not everything has to be a tragic. Mine went to this space, and it doesn't have to be that tragic. Whatever you share, it could just be something that you feel like you really have tried to keep hidden, that you don't want to be vulnerable about. It could just be that you hate your job. That's okay. I mean, everybody in your life, all your family expects you to love your job. Now, if you're doing this for a company, maybe, everybody expects you to love your job. And so that just might feel like a burden, and like they don't want to share, and they can't get vulnerable about it because everybody around them will judge them. So it doesn't have to be something that would make people break down, but it could. And so that's where I would just like be very cautious on it. But the reason we're having this conversation is because it would be powerful.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to it could also be the flip side, right? So Jeff, you're telling your story, or you're sharing, what you wouldn't share. But I'm thinking about the best friend in the story, and whoever that best friend is in the audience. Maybe it's not something traumatic that happened to me that year. Maybe it's something I regret that I did. If I were that best friend, maybe I'm the one who says, you know what? I had a friend who reached out to me in high school, and I said, it's, nobody cares.
Oh my God, Mark, you just made me have an idea. Sorry, Jeff. I feel like sometimes you get Mark and me going and we're just like, da, 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 da.
I love it. I'm totally loving it. I mean, you guys are pouring value. You're pouring excellent ideas. So I'm already totally looking forward to sharing this with everyone. So please keep going. I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Okay, well, Jeff, I have this idea. Mark, this is brilliant. Another great exercise you could do is like you teach something and then say, have an exercise. You're now the best friend in this story. You picked up the phone. How can we show empathy? What would you have done? How can we rewrite the script? How can we?
Wow.
Right? So now you're teaching people, you're also teaching people how to respond to it. Like, and then you could crowdsource. I love doing this thing where sometimes I'll do a powerful exercise and then I'll have, I'll do it different ways, but sometimes I'll have them partner up and then I'll be like, raise your hand if your partner said something so brilliant. And then somebody will raise their hand and they'll share something. And then you're like, and everybody in the room is just blown away. And we're just like, oh my gosh, that's so good. So maybe even after like crowdsource, like some of the best responses, because then as a whole group, we can learn how to be better in those situations. So Mark, you triggered me when you said, be the best friend.
And then you took it and you took it.
Well, that's what we're supposed to do here, right? I mean, we just like, that's our goal. But Jeff, I see, so something just made me realize too, everything that we've talked to you about, Jeff, and we don't have to do anything else to your idea. Your idea is perfect. Your idea is awesome. What I think you need to do is support it with these exercises and engagements to really make people feel that experience. So instead of it being like a talk where you're just like, da, 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 it's more like a feeling and experience and an emotional exchange and like me rethinking something. I had a thought too for you. One night, my daughter was pregnant with her second, and me and my son were driving to the hospital because she was going in the hospital. She was going to have the baby. Turns out it was a false alarm. She was just having like pre-contractions, which was good because she was a little early. We're both super tired. I asked my son to drive home. We're in the car. It's like 2:30 in the morning and we're driving and this car almost T-bones and hits my side. Like and it woke us both up. We were like, oh my God, there was no stop signs either direction. And it was like anyway, doesn't matter. I told my son, Jason, we pulled over and we were like, oh my God, woo. And then I said, wow, what could we have done better in this situation? And just to have a conversation about that made us more prepared for the next time something came up. And I think that's what you can do for the audience. And we're like, well, when we're in these streets where we don't know where the stop signs are and stuff, why don't we creep out and you'll never come to an intersection like that again and just go right through it. So it's one of these weird spots where there's and another guy was going really fast. Anyway, you can't, that situation could have ended tragically and there's no way to redo it. And it's the same thing for your situation. I feel like it's like your situation could have ended tragically, but now we get a chance to rewire it.
Yes.
Here's what's speaking to me right now about this. As you speak, Jeff, on the topic of mental health, and people are struggling so much to a point where they might consider, you not only have the opportunity to speak to them, but now you have this opportunity to speak to anyone else around them and how they can help. And, we talk about vulnerability. I think Brene Brown has made the word vulnerability one of the most famous words on the planet,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, really. She's become you've just added a level to this that's not only about vulnerability, but it is about that deeper level of empathy. And Cathey, when you said, if you were to put yourself in the other person's shoes, what would you say to make the situation better? I think that question now multiplies your audience, Jeff, tenfold.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we think about suicide prevention and we're speaking to kids to make sure if you're ever in this place. But now this is for all of the friends.
For everybody.
This is for everybody.
It is. Yeah.
Love it.
Wow.
Now as a speaker, you've opened up more places that you can talk, because now you can talk to people. You can talk to people. A huge part of your message can be how to talk to people in your life. Here's how to do, and then so half of it is speaking to the person that is having the issue, which is all of us, right? We all struggle with something that we need to be vulnerable with. But then the other half, if somebody doesn't self-select themselves, if you do get that person in the room, it's like, everything's fine, I'm great, nothing, but then at least you're giving them a tool also to be like, well, and I had a thing happen, Jeff. Actually, one of my friends called me, had a phone in one hand and pills in the other hand, and called me. It's a lot of pressure.
Wow.
And he's talked about it publicly. I won't say his name, but he's talked about it publicly since, because it was a moment where I didn't actually even want to pick up the phone which is odd, because I was driving and I was on a trip and I picked it up, and I'm glad I did. And so you give that tool. And I wish I would have listened to you talk before I had this conversation, because I felt like you, Mark, I think I blanked out. I don't know exactly what I said. And but if I had a chance to really think about it before somebody made a call to me, I would be grateful.
And let me add, I have a friend who had a lot of issues with depression. And many, 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 many years ago, before I met Jeff Davis, when I wish I would have had Jeff in my ear, I said something to him that now, many years later, I wish I hadn't said. He was dealing with depression, and I said, man, just stop doing that. Stop thinking that. And he's like, it's not that easy. And I'm like, yeah, it is that easy. Just stop thinking that. And I regret saying that to this day. And I wish that I had the language, the know-how, the Muhammad Ali of mental health in my brain to just get me to say something else. I think I come from a much more mature place of understanding now, but how many more people can we help to not say those hurtful things, or to be more aware of what they're saying in those moments? Because we never know when those moments, or when those conversations, or when somebody might open up around you. And we want to help people to be more prepared for those moments, right? Because vulnerability happens when it happens. It's not planned. It happens when it happens, and we have to be ready for it. Yeah. So, man, wow.
Jeff, we've done a lot of talking, because we've gotten really excited about how to. We kind of geeked out about how to build this into, a TED Talk and or keynote, and how to make your message more powerful. But I really want to hear how would you so let's say you're walking into a room. Let's do keynote, because it'll give you a little bit more options. TED Talk's a little restrictive. It's kind of 18 minutes. It's not, you can't do too much audience engaging, if you were going to give a keynote tomorrow on this, walk us through kind of what you think you would want to do now, how you would open, how you would engage, what lesson would you teach? Give us like an outline.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite things from what we've talked about here today. So I'm starting out where there's a hook. You always want to grab them. You always want to pull them right in. So I'm taking them right into that very difficult moment. And then I'm going to give them some really good sensory details. And then the part that I really loved, among everything else from our discussion, is you've got the part where I'm thinking about making this tragic decision and I call the friend, and that's exactly when I switch it to them. And it can be both them as if they were receiving some really, really harsh words from someone else, and if they were to get that call and they had to then give it to somebody else. And that creates a whole experience for them right there. And that's all sorts of audio engagement. That's what we've been talking about. And then from there, it could be sharing their toughest moments. And like we talked about how to facilitate that, most would share it. And even if they don't want to go as deep as perhaps I would, they can still share what they're comfortable with. And then going through that story, that's when I can then pull them from the valley back to the mountaintop, and then I'm leaving them with that take-home message. And then, of course, I have all my insights, etc. So that would be a really key thing that I would think about from what we talked about today.
I love that. Yeah, I know. Same, Mark. I'm like, I love that. See, as you kind of spelled that all out, Jeff, I'm picturing this room and what it would be like and how it would close off and how I would leave there feeling. And I'm sure that it would be a really powerful experience. And I would walk away from that a changed person, even knowing stuff I know now. I mean, if Mark and I went into that room tomorrow, just because of things that happen in the room, you can't even tell us what's going to happen in that room. But I know we would walk away from it with an experience that we know nothing about right now.
Yeah.
I would encourage you too at that end. I think you should find a way to have them partner up and be the best friend, and then have the partner kind of be the one to raise their hand and say, hey, does anybody in here, did your partner say something that you were like, that advice was like, everybody should hear that advice, and end on some of these really good. Because I always feel that way. I feel like when I'm teaching something, it's like I've been around, I teach speaking, storytelling, I'm around it. That doesn't mean that there isn't awesome ideas in the crowd. And I'm like, I love to crowdsource some good stuff. People say things all the time that I'm like, that's really good. Like, that's really, really good. So I think you could crowdsource a bunch. And if you ever have a group where maybe what was shared wasn't super powerful, you could share some of your own. Like you could be like, oh, that's great. That's great. Also consider, and then maybe close with something, that you might already have prepared.
Yes.
Just as your plan B, that if nothing in the room really seemed to kind of float to the top.
And I love how we talked about empathy today as well. And we peeled layers and layers and went deeper and deeper. And we found the empathy at the core as well. And we have just an unfathomable number of people struggling in the world. I mean, everyone struggles at one point or another. So everyone needs empathy, and yet it's so lacking. And I say that not so much being frustrated with the world, so much that I have empathy for the lack of empathy. So we need to get empathy, and that experience is exactly what we talked about. So I loved it. I mean, I also love the magic, seeing you two go back and forth and following the stories. I mean, awesome stuff.
Well, Jeff, you can also call that the empathy exercise. That's what you could call it. Just name it that. It's simple, it's powerful, it's clear.
Go ahead, Gabby.
You know me and liking to name things and give them a concept, right? It's just like, because then they could walk away and be like, oh, I played this empathy exercise game, and here's how the game goes. And then they could play it with their families or with their coworkers or whatever, which is like, Mark, here's a situation. And it doesn't have to be Jeff's exact situation. The empathy exercise just means there's two people or two or more people in a scenario, and then one of them needs empathy, and you're playing that role of, how do I give empathy in this situation? And then you just call it the empathy exercise. And then you could even tell people, you can practice the empathy exercise with your kids, you can practice it with your friends, you can practice this with your family. Like, practice empathy. We need more of it.
And then once the Muhammad Ali of mental health steps out of the ring, the fight continues to happen.
And I just thought of this spontaneously now in the moment. I could say something like, and I'm speaking to the audience, and I say, imagine someday there's going to be someone up on stage who is going to be thanking you for you being the hero of their story because you saved their life.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Love
I do
that.
love that.
It
I
just
love
came
that so
spontaneously. Wow,
much.
this is fantastic. What a discussion. This is awesome.
Well, maybe that's a great place to ask. Like, I'm so curious. Like, Jeff, we did a little bit of a different format today. Although this always portrays what Mark and I do a lot, which is like we take people through a whole process of, idea conception to stage and being stage ready. And so all of these places, but this conversation seems to be a little further along, and we can get a little bit more in the nitty-gritty details because you're further along. You've already given a TED Talk. You've already been doing this. And so I'd love to hear some of the things, like if you were to reiterate back to the audience, like what are some of the things that you're taking away? How has your mind been blown? Like, tell us all the ways.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'm let me just say this, and I say this with the utmost compliment to you guys, where I'm a paid global keynote speaker, and I mean it sincerely. When I got tremendous value from this discussion. So you guys are both tremendous coaches, and also are worth a lot of money in what you do, because I'm already doing it, and you've just helped very much. So I love. I mean, I'm swarming with ideas here. I'll for sure be going back to watch this again, but I'll share with you what I have here. First off, we talked about the experience, which I was doing, and then we went even deeper into that. So how can we give them an even deeper experience? The audience engagement, getting them sharing stories with each other, making it about them, even as I'm sharing my deepest moments. We talked about emotional truth, even if we switch out characters. That was another really value add, and that's something that I've sort of grappled with through the years. So that was another thing. And then you guys also shared stories like, oh, what if you're sharing someone else's story, and you're sort of saying he or she, and then you weave it back to the you. That also connected to what we were saying. So that was some other really good stuff. We talked about this a few minutes ago, the empathy. So I really love that part. And then we brought it all together, where then we were talking about, okay, how can I crush it as a TEDx speaker, and then also as a keynote speaker. And I mean, I'm collaborating with a person here in Rotterdam, Netherlands. We're talking about doing a retreat for CEOs. And I'm going to use what you've talked about with the CEOs.
Heck
So,
yeah.
I love it. I mean, this is very unique. And yeah, I also want to thank you guys so much. I mean, just like pouring value. So yeah, very much enjoyable, and also a unique experience too.
Mark, I would love to end this episode with just thoughts to Jeff. And so I have one, and you can go next, because then you'll see what I'm doing here. Jeff, I can't but help to, the more I've got to know you, especially on this call, I love your light. I love who you are as a person. I love your positivity. I love your smile. I love your laugh. And I'm so grateful that you are on this earth doing what you're doing. And so thank you for pushing through your hard times and the hard times that you continue to go through, whatever they may be. Thank you for doing this, because I think it's super valuable, and you've really touched my heart. So I so appreciate you being on the show and sharing your story. And Mark.
I'm just going to say it goes all the way back to 2014, when we met each other inside of a room, and there were 3 of us speaking, because we were all going to be semi-finalists going to Malaysia. And you never know how a small moment of just meeting another person in a room can really balloon into a friendship. And I'll even use the word brotherhood. And Cathey, you know how much I love family. So to call you a brother means a lot to me, and I hope it means a lot to you. I am so thankful for our brotherhood. I'm so thankful that since 2004, 2014 rather, that we have stayed in touch. And it is beautiful to see how you have progressed and how you have taken your message and touched so many people. And I am honored to have you as a brother here sharing this message, and already coming up with ways to share this message with so many other people. There will be one day where you, after you've called yourself the Muhammad Ali of mental health, someone will call themselves the Jeff Davis of.
Wow. Cathey and Mark, I deeply receive your words. Thank you for that. That touched my heart. Words can't even describe how it was to receive that. So thank you for that. And also for what you guys do, and Cathey for shining your light and for helping so many people as a coach and as a facilitator. And Marc, to call me a brother really means a lot, and it's a mutual feeling. And you're my brother, and we have stayed in touch, and we've been so supportive of each other. And here we are talking all these years later. It's just absolutely incredible.
I love this. Okay, Jeff, really important question, because now when our audience has heard you, people are going to be looking for you. And so where will they find you? Because I hope that our audience, there are people out there that want to hire you, and that they do. I hope that people will follow you because they want to continue to hear your story. So where's the best place for them to do that?
Yes, first and foremost, I'd say my website, which is jeffdspeaks.com. My first name, the letter D, and then speaks, plural.com. I've also got a blog on there with lots of free resources. I'll also say LinkedIn, I'm active on, so they can find me on LinkedIn as Speaker Jeff Davis. I'm also out there on the other social media platforms, YouTube, etc. You can see the links on my website. And also feel free to email me directly if you have any questions, you want to talk about anything. Jeff@jeffdspeaks.com is my email.
And don't forget to pick up that book, Reach Your Mountaintop. I love that book by Jeff Davis.
Ooh,
and it won an award.
Love it.
Won an award in inspirational nonfiction.
Oh, congrats. Okay, pick up that book. And Jeff, I'm going to ask you a question that I'm going to have you at the very end, because I'm going to tell our audience also where they can get in touch with Marc and I, but I want you to be thinking about this. I want you to share one thing with the audience. So it's kind of that empathy thing. So your kind of final statement. But for anybody watching, if you have anybody out there that you know that you're like, oh, they need to talk to Marc and Cathey, like they need to have this idea conversation, because wow, I'm just blown away by this conversation. Or if you yourself have an idea, just reach out to Marc and I. Would love talking to really cool people doing interesting, fun things and things that are helpful for the world, like what Jeff's talking about. Our website is it's about to go down show.com. You can reach us there. Jeff, what's your final message to the audience, to the world?
You may be struggling, you may be going through difficult times, or you did in the past, you are now, or you will in the future. And I want to tell you that the thing that you are most afraid to share is what will most help other people. That you will get through this, whatever you're struggling with. And no matter what it is, I want to tell you that I believe in you. You have a purpose for being here on this planet. And as you uncover that purpose and activate it, and you share what you need to share, you are going to impact a lot of people. The world needs you, and I send you all my love.
Jeff, thank you so much. Thanks for being on our show, and thank you for sharing that message. It was awesome. Well, that wraps up this awesome, amazing episode of It's About to Go Down. And to our audience, please check out our entire array of shows. And thank you for watching.